Hello.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Oh my goodness, I have to comment on it. Your hair is adorable. I love it.
Thanks. Obviously I washed my hair, but for a few days it was like feeling like I don't know how to explain it because with curly hair, when it's not as clean, it actually curls better, but then it kind of feels like heavy and weird. And so I kept saying like, okay, I kind of like how it looks, but like it feels kind of gross. So I took a shower and used a new shampoo yesterday, and it cleaned out everything, so the curls are kind of gone, but like it feels good. And I'm like, I just can't decide which is better. Like if it feels good and doesn't look as nice, or if it looks good and doesn't feel as nice. I'm like, I don't know. I'm kind of in the middle.
Oh
But
my goodness. Yeah, like when I had long hair, I would do headband curls in it and I would like let it go for a few days. And yeah, it looked great, but I'm just like, yeah, by the last day, I was like, okay, I'm kind of done.
yes, yes, especially because it does come down to my face. So then it's like, then my face feels even more gross because I've got like hair oil and stuff in my face. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know. Some days I choose the look, some days I choose the feel, and we just kind of roll with it.
Yes.
Very in line with my character, I think.
Okay, so as we had planned to talk about, I'm Tammy Stroud. I'm talking with Kathryn Fuller. And today, I think we have planned to talk about, so basically where to start with talking to our kids about sex. And so kind of, I don't know, I think that's sort of the question on a lot of parents' minds about like, where do I even start with this? And so we thought we would have a conversation about like what our ideas are on that topic.
Yeah. Um, we kind of were brainstorming a little bit about this last time we talked, and I definitely think one of the best things to mention right off the bat is just usually the sex talk starts well before you actually talk about sex. And a lot of it comes from you have to have a stable relationship with your kid so that they know they can ask questions. They know that you're going to give them answers. Actually, I was just thinking about this like yesterday, I think. There's a post that I've seen go around Facebook a lot, and it drives me crazy. And I hope it's okay to share that. But the post is something about like this older person was remembering when they were a kid, and they asked their parent, what does sex mean, or something along those lines. And the parent's answer to them was, oh, well, that's more mature than you. You don't need to know that. And then they go on in the post to say, like, I'm so glad that my parents like protected me, or something along those lines. And to me, it was like, okay, if your kid is old enough to ask you a question, they are old enough to have an answer to the question. And like, you might, how you answer the question does matter. Like, you don't give the same information to a 2-year-old that you give to a 16-year-old, but the very fact that they're able to ask the question is an indicator they're ready for some
Right.
information.
They're getting information from somewhere. So
Right.
is that
And
going
when
to be
you
you, or is
say
that going to be whatever? Yeah.
someone else, right? And so it was like, okay, in that example, the person that wrote that, they let that be the answer and they didn't go anywhere else. But for most of our kids, that is not how that works. When you don't give them an answer, they're going to find an answer somewhere else. And sometimes it's because they're asking other people. Other times it's just something falls in their lap. But either way, if you've relinquished your ability to be the one giving them the answer, then you have no control over what information they're given, if it's factual, if it's falls in line with the morals that you want to teach your kid. And so yeah, I've seen that post so many times in my newsfeed, and like it drives me nuts every single time. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever commented, but like it really bothers me. So I'm like, I just
Oh, I know. The whole
fundamentally
question of,
have to
okay, do
disagree.
I say something on here and explode this person's whole post, or
Exactly. And it's like, I I know where it comes from. I understand like the sentiment. And I am for, we do want to protect the innocence of our children, but sharing information is not the same as ruining your innocence. Like having information does not mean that you're going to do something bad. Having information itself does not mean, like, the information is not bad. It is what we make it. And if we put a bad spin on it, then yeah, it's bad, but it doesn't have to be bad. In fact, when we hide it, that actually can be bad.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you that like, even before we get to the word sex in a conversation, like the talking about sex starts with foundationally having that relationship, having that open communication, and I don't know, just sort of thinking of ways to foster a regular check-in with your child of, just talking about life. And so they will see you as somebody they can talk to, and you're a valuable resource for information, and that they, you'll tell them the truth, and you'll be factual, and you'll give them good advice. Like having that relationship of where they see you as a good resource like that is really one of the foundational things to being able to talk about more sensitive subjects like sex and things like that are real parts of life, but obviously, not very fun topics for most parents to kind of get into. Yeah.
I think a lot of the time we kind of make it out like children are not people. Like we're like children are children and adults are people. And so that I say that because you're talking about building that relationship. When they're little, you need to be interested when they're trying to talk to you. You need to be giving them like the words for the parts of their body, factual names for body parts so that they know what they're called. Because at 25, your child should be able to say penis or vagina or vulva or labia. Like those words should not be uncomfortable for an adult. But if you start as a child and you make them uncomfortable, then eventually you have to like unlearn that, and that's hard. That's not easy to do. But then also you have to just be able to understand that they are people. And so when you, for example, if your 2-year-old comes up to you and they're like babbling and you don't really know what they're saying, if you write them off then, when they're 3, when they're 4, when they're 5, when they come start talking to you about stuff and you're writing them off, then when you get to 16 and you want to start having a sex conversation, they don't feel like you're going to listen to them because you just write them off. You don't listen, you don't care what they're talking about. And so like if you're looking at this as a whole, right? If you are starting at the beginning, the way to start is you just start at 1, at 6 months, at 2. You start using accurate words. You start listening to them babble and try to have like baby conversation. You talk with them. But maybe your kids are already past that stage. And then what do you do then? If you can't go backwards in time, how do you start building that as an older kid?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things, the practical things I think are a starting place if you're like, well, I didn't do that stuff. And so like, where do I go now, is fostering in sort of accountability routines for you as the parent to make sure you're regularly checking in with your child. So people do this in different ways. Like in my household, like we have this thing called mom meetings, and where I have it's just a 20-minute meeting that I have with each of my kids once a week. And we just, it's just like a quick check-in. That's not to say we don't have conversations outside the mom meeting, but like it's an accountability routine for me to make sure I am checking in. And like some families will do like date nights where they'll take one kid out and just have fun with just them. I don't know, just if you're having trouble, like I think a lot of us, frankly, in our busy lives of making sure we're doing those sorts of one-on-one check-ins and on a regular basis, schedule it. There's nothing wrong with like putting it on the calendar to make sure you prioritize having that check-in and sort of fostering those conversations and sort of building that relationship. So that's sort of like the quick, practical way to sort of turn the tide of we need to just be able to foster a conversation better. We're having trouble, talking about anything. So this is sort of a practical way you can start that. As far as as we get more specifically having conversations about sex, I think the two big areas to start with is fostering the sense of bodily autonomy, and that you give consent for anybody to touch you, that you own your body and nobody else has the right to touch your body without consent. So fostering an environment where that's okay. And just talking about anatomy, like you were talking about real names for real parts, like knowing how, what's the name of your part? I have a vulva or I have a penis, like knowing those things. And that's just very sort of foundational of where you want to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it may be that as a parent, you don't know that. And that's okay. Like, that's not something to be ashamed of. That's not something to be scared of. But I mean, as the parent, you're the one responsible for teaching your child. And so if you don't know, then it's time to start learning and start figuring out, like, okay, what do I not know? So that then I can teach my kids. And really, it's better for you. Like, it's better for you to be able to understand what's going on with your body. It's better for you in your marriage to be able to communicate, like, this thing that's happening, I don't like it, or it doesn't feel good, or this other thing feels better, or, having that ability to communicate with your spouse is good. And all of that kind of trickles down. So it's not like we a lot of times want like an easy one thing that will make
the
it
box.
fair, right? We want one curriculum that we can just like throw it at our kids and then they'll figure it out and you don't have to deal with it. And that's not really going to work. And even if it would work, you're leaving out all the other areas that you can improve on because you're kind of disconnecting from it. Like, I think Americans in general, we just disconnect all the time. And that's why there's a lot of problems with like alcohol and workaholism. There's like all kinds of ways we disconnect, and it's not helping our families. But this is one that, like, even in the church, we're disconnecting from the conversation and we want somebody else to do it for us. And so we're like, okay, well, who can I have talk to my kids? Or which book can I just give them and then leave it at that, but we have to be able to teach ourselves or learn from somebody. We have to learn so that we can then share, and it'll be better. And actually, before we leave this, I wanted to say about the scheduling. Scheduling can look different for everybody. And so if you like hear the word schedule and you're like, well, I'm not one of those people that does like a schedule. I don't have a schedule of my week. Well, that's fine, but you probably have routine times in your week that you could plug it in, right? So I was just thinking, like, if you pick up your kids from school, you can do on your drive home, that's your scheduled time where you have a conversation. Or if you normally eat dinner as a family, and during that time, a lot of people do like highs and lows, or highs, like 3 favorite things or whatever. People do those conversations at dinner. You can just add in another like 5 minutes to that and just say, I just want to know how you're doing. I just want to know what you like this week. I want to know what's your interest. What is something that you're curious about? And that doesn't have to mean sex. That means anything, like anything you're curious about. And if I don't know, then I'm going to go find an answer for you, or I'm going to help you find an answer. And that's all of that, like fostering the connection that you need with your kids to be able to then carry it over into a conversation about sex.
Yes. And another thing I was thinking about is that, like, we as parents absolutely need to own, our responsibility and our influence in this area. But I don't want to, like, I think both of us are a big fan of resources, using a resource out there. Like, we just don't want you to feel like, I got this book, let me hand you this book and walk away from it like that. We don't want you to use the resource in that way, but collaboratively, like using a resource, like one of the resources that like I really like for just initially exploring reproductive anatomy is there's this group called My Fertility Matters, and they have this presentation called The Cycle Show, and they have an online version of it that's a little bit interactive. And basically you know, like in a really accessible to a young person's sort of point of view way. They walk you through like reproductive anatomy and how a baby is made. And like it's completely just, you know, on a child's level. And I think it's a great resource to go through like with your child and, you know, pause it and talk about it. And or like you can go through it yourself for the first time and be like, oh, I don't think I understood that quite right. And then you can go through it with your kid and, you know, y'all can talk about it as you go through it. And so like big fan of using resources. And like one of the things Kathryn and I were talking about is all like different resources like we could share with you. So we'll probably try to leave some links on that. But yeah, we're a fan of resources, and definitely us, you know, even us having this conversation, we hope will be a resource to you to kind of spark some changes or give you confidence in how to get started. But, you know, like ultimately, like you got to circle back to real relationships, real conversations, you know, those sorts of things.
Yeah, the resource is a tool, it's not an answer, you know, and that's
Yes.
where I think we need to just like, as parents, we just need to remember, and that's true across the board. That's true with their faith. You know, a resource like a minister it's a tool, but it's not an answer. The minister is not going to make sure that your kids are going to stay
Right.
faithful.
You can't be like, oh, I sent them to Bible class. This is fine.
Right.
No, you got
Even
to be having
even
those
your
conversations at home. Yeah.
Right. Even your actual doctor, like your doctor is a resource. They're a tool to give you answers. But if you go home and you don't do anything with what they've told you, they're not the answer to whatever your problem is. And so I think we understand that in a lot of other aspects, but then we get into things like sex or even spirituality and parents. It's like, I don't, like I said, we just disconnect. We don't know how to do it. And so I think we get scared and we think, I think some of it is we think we're going to do it wrong, and so then we don't even try. And I think that's the problem is when we don't even try, we are for sure doing it wrong. And it's not quite so what's the word? It's not quite so sensitive that you are going to mess it up. You know what I mean? Like if the conversation is open, if you have the relationship with your child that you can have conversations ongoing, then even if you kind of flub the first 2 or 3, 6 years from now, the conversations come easier and you can even circle back and say, you know, I don't think I answered that question very well, or I think I reacted poorly to that question that you asked me. Reaction can be a big deal. And if you react poorly, one, it's okay to react poorly. I think it's important to circle back and say, okay, I really reacted poorly. It was okay that you asked that question. I hope you don't feel like you were bad for asking the question. I just didn't know how to react. And so that was my reaction. And I'm sorry. It's important. I'm sorry. And then say, okay, well, I've had some time to think about this or research this, or I've talked with your dad or like whoever. I've talked about it, I figured it out, and this is a better answer for you. And I hope this helps. But along with the reactions, it's okay if you need a little bit of space to react or to give an answer without reacting or trying to control a reaction. So if a question is brought up face to face and you really don't know, just say, I don't know, you know, just say, I really need to take some time to think about that or to learn about that because I've never had that question. So I've never looked for an answer. Or I've also wondered that and I just don't know. So I'm going to look it up. If you routinely are having problems with that, you can have like a notebook that you pass between you and your kid. And again, this does not have to be exclusive to sex. This can be everything. Like we have trouble saying I love you. And so I want to work on that. And so I'm going to have a notebook that I just write you sweet notes and I leave it on your bed while you're at school. And then when you come home, you can read it. You can write me something back and put it on my bed and I'll read it. That's really good for just the general connection. And you can use it in this, like in the conversations about sex, you can have, okay, this book is for anything. Maybe even say like once a month, I want you to make sure that you are asking me a question about these 5 things. You're asking me a question about God. You're asking me a question about sex. You're asking me a question about marriage or relationships or whatever, just so that, you know, you're helping them to be open and ask questions. Yeah, and that's pretty much my thought.
No, I mean, one of the things I loved about what you're bringing up is that to set up realistic expectations about what this will look like, it's going to look like an ongoing conversation rather than a one and done. And that I think that shift in our expectation as parents is really important. So like, we don't feel like this, if it's just one thing, we have to get it perfect and we have to, because this is the only time they're going to hear this. And so, but if this is an ongoing conversation, we do have permission to, be imperfect in it and circle back and sometimes apologize and correct ourselves and like, oh, you know what, I talked about this and I thought that was right, but I actually read this article and actually, this is probably a better way or whatever. Like, it's okay to apologize and admit you're wrong and you learned something new. Like, and like, I think we somewhere in our brains, like we know it's supposed to be okay to do that. And like all of relationships with like that idea is sort of out there and we're sort of okay. But I think we have a hard time specifically giving that permission to ourselves to be human and to be okay. And with proceeding imperfectly and to circle back and to apologize. Like, I think a lot of it is inner work on yourself, giving yourself permission to move through this imperfectly and to, let this be a give and take relationship that will grow over time.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I think about previous generations and how parenting looked, and it really, I don't know that it's this much today, but it could be. But I know in previous generations, it was like, you don't question the parent. Like the parent, whatever the parent says is right, and that's it. And I'm not saying like you teach your kids to question authority or anything like that. But what that does is then as a parent, it's like, oh, a parent has to get it right. Like the parent is what they say goes. And so I can't say the wrong thing. Or even like, who cares if I say the wrong thing? It's what I said, and that's the end of it.
Doubling
We
down
close
on
the conversation, we shut the door, and it's unhealthy. And when you grew up seeing that was your model, then it is hard to say, oh, I don't really want to do that, but I don't know how to do anything else because that's what I've seen. And so that is like relearning, okay, if I don't want to be the kind of parent that never apologizes, well, how do I just start apologizing? And literally it's like, I yelled 3 days ago at my child. I'm gonna get down on their level. I'm gonna look them in the face. I'm gonna say, listen, 3 days ago, I yelled at you. I know that was not the right thing to do. I made a bad choice. I'm not okay with that choice that I made, and I'm sorry. And it's like little stepping stones. Maybe it was something you did a month ago, and it took you a whole month to be able to come back and say, I'm sorry. Like build up the courage to say, I'm sorry. But
Yes.
to that point, that's what we have to do in all of our conversations. It's okay to say the wrong thing. It's okay to not know. But if your only model of a parent is, well, the parent knows everything, the parent is the last word and you don't question anything, then as the parent, it's like, oh, well, I'm not supposed to question anything. I just have to have an answer. And they need to leave it at that.
Right. And I don't know, for me as a parent, like I don't want, like I am wildly imperfect. I'm trying my best, but yeah, I'm human and I am imperfect, and so are my children. And so kind of we're moving through this together. And I think especially for when you were talking about like practicing a new skill of like, just talking about it imperfectly, circling back, apologizing, telling new information, like all of these sort of new skills that maybe weren't modeled for you. I think giving yourself permission to just kind of do it awkwardly, do it badly, to fumble through it. I mean,
Right.
to practice at it, basically, to do it imperfectly, like giving yourself permission to do that, I think is a big thing.
Yeah, doing it at all is a step up from not doing it. And so once you start doing it, then you can perfect it. But if you're not doing it at all, you're never going to get good at it. I think too about when I was in high school, I was in band, and one of my teachers, he said, when we're practicing, you guys have to play out because we need to hear mistakes. If you're doing something wrong and I can't hear it, and then we go on to stage and you're excited and you do it really loud, everybody's going to hear it. And the whole time we could have fixed it, but you never did it loud. So that really stuck with me through life. Like you have to do mistakes big so that they can be noticed and you can fix them. If instead you're afraid of making mistakes, you'll never fix the mistake and you'll just keep doing it wrong, or you do it wrong in a really big, important situation because you haven't been working on it, you know? It also made me think of, I saw this thing this week that was talking about, you know, a lot of times we're scared to do something because we think we're going to do it wrong or we can't do it. And there are other people out there doing it poorly and people are paying them to do it poorly. And it's like, yeah, like I could be practicing this and not scared of the fact that I will mess it up to some extent. But instead, I'm scared. And then somebody else is doing it poorly, knowing they do it poorly, and they're still like profiting from that. And
Right.
I'm just scared to even start, you know? So we have to, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be nervous about it. But when we start letting fear make our decisions, then, you know, we're not in charge of what we're doing. And that's something biblically, like we're meant to be sober minded. Part of being sober minded is I have control of what I do and what I don't do. And if I'm letting something else make that decision for me, I'm not sober minded because I'm not the one in control of what I'm doing. I'm letting something else do that for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, especially like giving yourself permission to kind of go into this awkwardly and sort of do it not perfectly is especially good. Like, if you have older children and you feel like, you know, I don't know, we're not having these conversations. I don't know. Like, I feel like, you know, they're about to leave the house to go to college and like, I haven't, you know, this isn't really come up. Like, I don't know, just give yourself permission to sort of have the awkward conversation of like, okay, I know this, we haven't really talked much about this stuff, but you know, it's important to me that, you know, we sort of have the conversation and you know that you can reach out to me about this stuff. And so I came across this resource, you know, you can go through that anatomy resource, you can go through other books together, like you can just like pull it out and talk about like, okay, we're going to talk through this together. And like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I really want us to have the conversation. And so, and yeah, like if you're going into that situation, it's going to be super, super awkward and just own it. Just know this is going to be weird. This is going to be awkward, but we're doing this because we love this person and we want to make sure, you know, they know you're somebody they can go to talk about. And, you know, you want to make sure they have some factual information to go with them.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say this earlier and I forgot, but this even is true if your kids are adults, you know, like most likely if you are uncomfortable having a conversation about sex, there are probably other conversations that you're uncomfortable having with your kid. And just the fact that you're uncomfortable having pretty general conversations means that your relationship could probably improve. And so if you're thinking like, oh, my kid is 22 and we never had this conversation, and truthfully, we don't talk about how school is going or we don't talk about what they're interested in, you know, all of that stuff, you can fix it. Like if you're alive, if they're alive, you always have the opportunity to come back and say, you know, I'm your parent and I love you and I want to have a connection with you, and put it out in the open. Like I look back and I wish that I had done things differently, but I'm here now and I'm ready to make some changes, and they might be hard or awkward or even confusing. Like, how do you do that? But I want to do that. And you just start the conversation there. And with sex, it may be that your kid's already married. Well, that's okay. Like, you can still have a conversation and say, listen, like, you may have questions, or, you know, if something's going wrong and you don't understand what's happening, I'm always here. I want to know if I can help. I would love to help share a resource, or, you know, the conversations may look different, but you still, it's never like we just can't talk about it at all. Like, that should never be the thing, is we just don't talk about it. Maybe there's a boundary. Maybe, you know, your kid is married and the spouse says, I'm not comfortable with that. Okay, you have to be considerate of that. But like, from the standpoint of just connection and family and your parenting, there should never be something that it's like we just don't talk about that. Like that's an unhealthy way to live life. Secrets are not good. Things just being off topic because we're scared, because we're uncomfortable. It's not healthy. It's not good for us. It's not good for your kids.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And yeah. Yeah, I think giving yourself permission to open the door to awkward conversations is, yeah, kind of a big personal thing of, yeah, that starting point for maybe a lot of people and trying to talk about these things. Absolutely.
Definitely.
Okay, so I feel like mostly we've covered what we wanted to cover with this thing. Any other thing that was on your mind that you're like, oh wait, let me make sure to add this thing or whatever?
Do you have anything? Because I need to think about it. I don't think so, but I just need to think.
I don't think so. Like, I think I have the main things I wanted to talk about just how to get started, and that in getting started, it's typically the first thing you do is not the word, have the word sex in it. Like
Yeah.
you're doing other stuff to sort of set the stage for having this conversation way before you have the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think I would just say for a lot of us, it's just uncomfortable, and it's okay to do things that are uncomfortable. And it may take like finding another adult that you can comfortably talk about it with, whether it's your spouse, whether it's a best friend, whether it's your own parent or a mentor or something. It really is just like a muscle. The more we talk about anything, the easier it is to talk about it. Like if you are not used to public speaking, the more you public speak, the easier it'll be. It may not ever be comfortable, but if you do it 3 times, well, the third time it's easier than the first time. And so if you're really struggling with like, you're just feeling uncomfortable, maybe it just means you need to practice more and you need to find a way that it is comfortable, because it doesn't have to be like I'm gonna die every time I'm gonna have a conversation. But also just being uncomfortable is not a good excuse for not having connection with your kid, whatever the topic, whatever that looks like. It's just not a good excuse. Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, so I think we're good for this week. For anyone watching, if you have any other topics that you want us to kind of dive into, feel free to let us know, and we'll just kind of see where this goes. I'm always enjoy talking with Kathryn. She's a wealth of information, and I love the way her brain works. So this is always fun for me.
Appreciate it. Me too. I'm like, I've been looking forward to this all week. So this is good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right.
So I'll see you later.
All right. I'll see y'all later. Bye.
Bye.